Hello, my friends. Welcome to Sundays with Segall, where any Sunday that both Eric and I are available, we're going to try to record a conversation about all things legal and more. We always love talking to Eric Segall. He's one of my best friends, and so we hope that you enjoy this. If you don't, you don't have to listen. You don't have to listen to it at all. You could just skip right on to the next, and I'll be back tomorrow with a great show, great guest, and my guest will be Dr. Christina Greer of Fordham University. That is the Monday show, so look forward to that. Eric Segall will be at PODJAM in Las Vegas, so I hope you'll get your tickets now. There's tickets in the show links, a 3-day experience with some of your favorite guests. I really hope that you'll consider coming to Vegas March 28th through 30th. Okay, I'm not going to say much more other than I hope you're enjoying your weekend, and here's the original Eric Segall single by Pete Coe, who I'll encourage to do a Sundays with Segall. And at the end of today's show, while I was talking to Eric, Vicky got back to me. I had requested that she just sing that line, and she did that and more. So you'll have to listen to the end and become a bumblebee to hear Vicky's Sundays with Segall jingle, which is very, very good. Pete Coe, take it away. The old school, the OG.
Bringing knowledge and gloom and a guest house too. He's got a Labrador dog, glad to give you a poo, 'cause he's the legal eagle.
Eric Segall.
Eric Segall.
It's time for Sundays with Segall. Hello, Professor Segall.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I think I would have picked a different melody, but that's fine.
Yeah, well, we'll workshop it. Anybody that wants to submit can. It should be noted right off the bat that you have some kind of a cold, and there's sniffling, there's throat clearing and coughing, and I really don't want to spend all day editing, but I hope people can just be thoughtful and compassionate, because none of us will escape these types of minor issues, but we want to talk to you. So
The muck I am currently feeling would have disqualified me from any other appearance other than on your show, because I trust you implicitly to make this sound good, even though there's almost no chance it's going to sound good given my muck.
I'm going to try to keep track of your muck by editing it by pressing one key, and there'll be a line on my file, and then I'll just remove the muck. There's a new AI for podcasters. It's remove Segall muck. Sundays with Segall.
So here's the thing for the audience, especially for my friend who did the previous Segall song for this show.
Yeah, that's Pete Coe.
Pete Coe.
Yeah, so Pete Coe played that, recorded that original, which I'll use that at the top of this so everybody knows that. But I've also asked Vicky now to record just Sundays with Segall, and she actually sent something just before. I haven't heard it yet. We'll listen to it together at the end of this conversation for the first time, okay?
Got it.
And then I've challenged someone to, what is it? Sundays in the Park?
With George.
If Pete Coe or John Carroll, anybody wants to re-record, that'll be fun. We'll get on that for sure. All right. Now, there's lots to talk with you about today. You specifically wanted to talk about a very important issue around the Supreme Court decision that will affect greatly the regulatory powers of the federal government, which is extremely consequential for all types of reasons and issues for every different kind of job, industry, and sector and quadrant of the United States of America. And we're going to get to that in a second, because it's super important, most important, and what you wanted to talk mostly about here on Sundays with Segall. But before we get there, there's a sniffle, I heard it. There is a question about Jack Smith. Special counsel Jack Smith resigns from the Department of Justice. His departure was disclosed in the court filing submitted Saturday. That's yesterday, because it's Sundays with Segall. And it was to Justice Aileen Cannon. So what do you want to say just basically about Jack Smith, his investigation, what might have been done differently, and most specifically, I guess, what this means?
Well, everybody knew he was going to resign. This was not a surprise. He has to resign effectively. I think the most important part of this controversy going forward is how America decides to decide the following really hard question. In a country where the president is assigned the task of prosecuting federal crimes, and only the president is assigned the task of prosecuting federal crimes, what do we do when the president and his top officials allegedly commit federal crimes? We can't expect them to investigate themselves in any kind of real way. When that issue came up after Watergate, when the Attorney General of the United States went to jail, when the Chief of Staff went to jail, when the president's lawyer went to jail for all of this stuff, the answer was this independent counsel statute that took virtually all of it away from the executive branch and gave the power to 3 judges in D.C. who could name an independent counsel. And that's how we got Monica Lewinsky. That's how we got Iran-Contra. That's how we got a bunch of other investigations. Eventually, the court upheld that whole thing 7-1 in a decision where only Justice Scalia dissented. But history will tell you that Scalia's dissent is the one that has won the day, that kind of statute will be deemed unconstitutional by the court on separation of powers cases. And even Elena Kagan said that Justice Scalia's best moment was probably his dissenting opinion in that case, where Scalia said, we can't have a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor, who cannot be fired by the president, whose only job is to get one person or one set of people, because that's not the way to run criminal law. Scalia had good policy points in that dissent. As a constitutional law matter, though, I think it's up to Congress to decide how best to do this.
Okay, so just to be clear, to quickly review, as a result of the corruption of Nixon and the crimes that were committed, they decided the president has too much power. We need to be able to have a special investigator that can investigate the president and other things. So we're going to create this statute. You need 3 judges. The D.C. court creates it. Statute, you called it, which is confusing. You create this new idea, which now you have a special prosecutor.
No, I got to stop you there. It's really important.
It's a legal
This was
thing.
a law that was passed by both houses of Congress and signed by the president.
Got it.
Which means, yeah, okay.
Which president signed the special counsel?
It would have been, I assume, Gerald Ford.
So now you have this.
I'm not sure about that. But check me on that, though. I'm not sure.
This new ability, this new.
Yes, but that's not the statute that Jack Smith is operating under. I didn't finish the story.
Oh.
So that statute got a lot of criticism when Kenneth Starr used it to politically assassinate basically Bill Clinton.
Right.
Because the original Whitewater investigation under that statute was about economics in Arkansas and the Clintons' alleged economic wrongdoing. But it turned into Monica Lewinsky lying under oath about sex and basically an impeachment. The Congress did not bring that law back when it expired because it had been so criticized. What Jack Smith was operating under is a different set of rules and regulations where the president is allowed to appoint an independent prosecutor, but the president also has the power to fire him at any time for any reason and at any moment, which is a whole different scheme than the other one. So what Jack Smith is an independent prosecutor who's really not that independent. And so the question going forward for Congress, I think, is, and the American people, what do we do? How do we investigate the president's top people if the president controls that investigation? Last thing. On the one hand, we have to have somebody do that because obviously, as Nixon showed and Trump is going to show and has showed, and even Clinton showed, presidents are not going to investigate themselves well. On the other hand, Pete, it is difficult to isolate a person, name them a prosecutor, give them time and money, and say your only job is to go after one person and you report to nobody. That's a very scary Star Chamber type of thing, too. I don't have a good answer to this. What I will say is this from personal experience. I litigated against the prosecutor in the Iran-Contra controversy. We litigated a number of different discovery issues. And circa 1990, a very well-meaning and good faith independent prosecutor who was investigating the biggest cover-up in American history, according to him, acted as if no law applied to them because no law did apply to them. It was a bad statute. It gave them this unlimited time and authority to investigate anybody pretty much once the investigation was assigned. So I don't know where the answer is. We need prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges, maybe some academics, to get together and figure out a way that we can have a system where the president is meaningfully evaluated and the president's top men when alleged to conduct crimes, but also is not unfair. I'll give you an example. James Watt was a very terrible administrator in the Reagan administration, Department of the Interior. He didn't care about the environment. His position was destroy the environment, basically. Eventually, he was accused of some crimes, and a friend of mine was part of the independent counsel process. My friend is a very conservative Republican. My friend told me, and was a prosecutor, my friend told me the amount of power that office had to investigate one person was simply abusive. You just can't do it. The whole game is getting that person. There's no selectivity bias. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't want to talk about Jack Smith. I don't care about Jack Smith. What I do care about, though, is how we solve this problem. And what we need are the biggest, smartest, most important people in criminal law and a few in constitutional law to tell us what does England do? What does France do? I don't know the answer to those questions.
Okay. Well,
Fair enough?
I do care about Jack Smith, and I grew to like him.
I liked him too. I think he's a good man.
Okay, I'm just saying. Felt really disparaging of a man who had done
really a binary.
Such really brave work. It really is courageous to do what he's done because he's been targeted by the most horrible man and most powerful man in the world forever. And you know what Trump always calls Jack Smith? I've listened to a lot of his speeches lately. He calls him sick. Calls Jack Smith sick. He says he's sick. And I think that's just so beyond the pale of what respectable leaders, at least in our country, and maybe I missed it, would refer to in this case, someone who had been investigated. You could say corrupt and all kinds of things, but like the way that he talks about all kinds of people that he targets, he really tries to dehumanize them. And I think that's important just to mention, no matter how you feel, even if you agree that you don't like the person, but the dehumanization must be kept conscious of. All right, now let's just ask you quickly.
Well said, Pete, well said. You're right. That's where our rhetoric has gone, and rhetoric matters.
Yeah, I want to try to. I've always tried to stay above that. It's always seemed hack to me because I used to listen to all those right-wing talkers like Mark Levin, and they would constantly make up these like insulting names for the New York Times or whoever, whatever, Clinton, whoever they wanted. And I always just like, ugh, it's so hack. Just the name calling is so childish and hack. And if you're going to do it, make it funny. Like Jimmy Kimmel does it with Trump like every night. It's always different. It's always a new Shitler. It's always something new. And it's funny, but I just find it so lowbrow and insulting and hard to respect someone who does that.
Sorry, Pete, but that's a great observation. In my opinion, that opens a big discussion can of worms just in this sense. We know what Donald J. Trump did the year before he ran for president. This is not a secret. He spent most of his time listening to Sean Hannity and other far right-wing radio. Wow. And he decided that the American people obviously liked that kind of insulting, demeaning, juvenile, male, adolescent name calling. So that's how he ran his campaign the first time, and that's how he's been ever since. Pete, it's an interesting thought experiment. If Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh and Mark Levin, who calls himself the Great One, that's all we need to say about that. Yeah. If those three men were actually the same politics, but different rhetoric, different styles, more like the 1970s conservatives who were much more William Buckley types, whatever, I think Trump would have ran that election very differently. He would have come out because he's not anybody. He's just a walking pickup of what other people do, and he's basically been imitating Sean Hannity ever since.
Well, yeah, and the most important part of what Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, and the right wing guys of the 80s and 90s and early aughts did is they dumbed down their audience in a very specific way. They dumbed down their audience by misrepresenting or not representing in any way how government functions and civics in general. So specifically what Levin would do is he would demand that Republicans do a thing that they did not have the votes for. And that's why I wrote an article, one of the only ones I've ever written for the Daily Beast, about listening to Mark Levin grill right-wing conspiracy theorists, the worst of the worst, maybe, Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, is it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. He was terrible, yeah.
And Levin demanded that he's on the radio, passed, and the senator's like, yeah, I'm with you, but we don't have the votes. Dumps him off the phone, makes fun of him, says he's weak, they're weak, whatever. But it doesn't take into consideration what governing requires in real life, and it just misleads or just misrepresents or doesn't represent in any way civics to their audience. And so it's, if you can't see that, then bless you. I don't know. I don't know what.
Pete, also one footnote to that. I think it's exactly right what you just said. Don't take that sentence out of context ever. But you know what, Pete? Reagan has his share of blame for all this because this all started in the early mid-'80s, around that time. And it was Reagan who, as you've mentioned to me many times, was really the first president to say the government is your enemy. Say that the government.
No doubt. That line alone, and that, yes, it made it. Absolutely, which is why the conversation we're going to have today about separation of powers, because you get into the bureaucrats. They're real people working in the federal government, many of which have PhDs and many of which are doing vitally important, life-saving skills, and they're not, but it's the government is your enemy, then all those bureaucrats are not human again. They're your enemy. They're just there taking your hard-earned money and wasting it on expensive hammers, which is, it's a good point to mention Reagan. But let me get back to one other thing I need you to get to weigh in on here on Sundays with Hugo. It's the headline this past week that Donald Trump has officially become a convicted felon. So he was indicted, he was prosecuted, he was found guilty, and then there was this long period between the what's it called? The decision and a jury decision and the sentencing. And we don't know, those of us that aren't legal scholars or experts, if that made him a convicted felon before the sentence comes down or after, or if it matters. But does this matter, and why was he so worked up about it? And the conventional wisdom is he didn't want to go down in history as being a convicted felon. He wanted the Supreme Court to somehow overturn that. But what happened and what's important around that decision?
Well, this is an issue of state criminal law, so I am not your best expert on this subject. What I understand, because I'm not a state criminal law guy, but my understanding is, I think, that you're a convicted felon upon sentence. And then assuming you appeal, and that takes 3 or 4 years, you always explain, I am a convicted felon, but my sentence is on appeal. Once that appeal is complete, then you are, and if it's affirmed, you are in fact a convicted felon. Pete, I guess my students occasionally get frustrated at me when they ask me hard questions and I respond with questions because they want to know more than that. But I'm going to answer your question with a question, and your audience can be mad at me if they want to. So my question is this, and I'm not a criminal law expert. So this crime that he was charged with on New York law, I did research at the time because it has implications for elections, and it's Rick Hasen type material. Rick is an election law expert in federal court and so on. I said to you very early on, I wish this case hadn't been brought. I think of all the cases, this was the weakest, and I'm not sure what the normal sentence would be in this kind of case. Probably not jail time for a white-collar defendant, probably. But here's my question. Let's say he had been accused of and convicted of murder, and then same time frame, and then he's going to be president a week later. Are we saying that he doesn't go to prison for murder because he's going to be president in a week? Because what we're saying here is he gets no jail time because he's going to be president in a week. That's what the court said. How does the nature of the crime change? Like, I guess I'm curious, but if you think about it that way, he should have been sentenced the same way any person would be sentenced if they committed the crimes the jury said he committed. Now, the response to that from academics is going to be, oh, Professor Segall, there you go again. This was not a normal crime. This was a crime that was a political crime, not usually handed out. But that's too bad. I don't want to hear about that. He was found guilty by a jury of his peers of a crime. What if that crime had been murder? Would America then be like, oh, fine, he's president, so he doesn't get to go to jail? I don't think so. Why is this different?
The reason why you're asking that question is, I think, you're asking us to consider the future as opposed to the hypothetical, or you're just saying, why aren't we consistent regardless of the crime?
I am saying that before, if you asked me a question about what I thought about the sentence, the conviction, what it means. And my answer to you is, I don't know how consistent no jail time for this kind of crime is under New York law. I'm just not an expert on that. But that's not what's going on here. The judge didn't say, I've had 30 previous defendants accused of similar crimes and none of them got jail time. He didn't say that. What the judge said was, he's going to be president in 2 weeks. So as a practical matter, all I can do is give him a sentence of unconditional release.
Well,
but would he have done the same thing if it had been murder? And if the answer is no, then I'm testing the principle. Right. I'm testing the principle. Yeah. What should we do with presidents who commit crimes, president-elects who commit crimes before they come into office? And my answer it doesn't feel right to say, because he's going to be president in 2 weeks, he should not go to jail for his crimes, if in fact he had killed somebody on Fifth Avenue in cold blood.
Testing the Principle. That's the name of that last segment, brought to you by, now you have to name an actual product that you use, whether it be a toothbrush or a cereal. Segall, go.
The Snowball.
The Snowball microphone. It's a USB microphone. Yeah. It's not great. Snowball.
Which you gave me. You sent this to me years ago.
Snowball microphone.
Frustration.
Not great. What? That's why I sent it, but it does delete all those sniffs and all that muck. We haven't heard a thing. All right, moving on.
Sunday.
With Segall. All right, here's the issue. Here's the big issue. Here's the big, let's head into law school. Let's head into your classroom. This is real life. Let's head into the weeds. Now, I'm going to get my machete out because if you bore me, I'm not one of your students. This is a damn podcast. It's my podcast. It's my classroom. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not following you. I don't even think this is important. And that means other people feel the same way. And then there'll be other people that listen and they are following you. And they're like, why do you interrupt Segall? And it's like, because I don't get it. All right. So the way I understand what we're about to talk about is the Supreme Court.
No, not a specific case. We're not going to talk about any specific cases.
Right. But the Supreme Court made a decision that changes a major paradigm in the United States of America. And it's now we're going to see it play out. And it has to do with separation of powers and the ability for the federal government to regulate industries. Do I have it right or am I misunderstanding?
My wife, Lynn Segall, who teaches problem solving at Emory Business School, has taught me over the years, and this is something all
Your
lawyers
wife teaches problem solving?
Yes. That's what she teaches. Literally.
She needs to come on the podcast and talk about it.
Oh, yes, of course, yes.
And also, that must be unbelievably intimidating to be partnered in any fashion with someone who teaches problem solving. You must know you're always – is there anything to be said about that for you?
Yes, I've learned so much from her about this. Yes. So relevant to our conversation right now.
Wow.
Before you meaning a person, before anybody or any organization attacks a problem or an issue, you must first define what the issue is.
Yeah.
If you leap to an answer to a problem that doesn't exist, or you leap to an answer that only solves half the problem, it's a bad answer. So, Pete, I want to be very clear at the beginning of this conversation about what problem you and I are trying to discuss and solve, okay? And this is the problem. We have, for example, the Securities and Exchange Commission. We have the Consumer Product Safety Commission. We have the Environmental Protection Agency. Just take those three things: the environment, securities law, consumer safety. Our country is 3,000 miles plus Hawaii and Alaska plus Guam plus Puerto Rico, et cetera. Our communities are as diverse as your neighborhood in New York and outside of Manhattan, to urban San Francisco, to rural Montana, to South Beach, to Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
We need a government to keep us safe from crime, climate change, and horrible economic predators that caused the 2007 financial crisis.
Great point. Thank you. Yes.
And numerous other things that any modern technological society will
food and drugs.
Yes. Vaccines, for example, the Food and Drug Administration, et cetera, and CDC.
And if you don't like vaccines, aspirin. Or if you don't like aspirin, lettuce. If you don't like lettuce, job safety. You don't like job safety. I've got more. Oh, my God.
I don't want to hear anymore. I'm on a roll. So here's the problem, my talkative friend, who needs to not interrupt my narratives.
I'm so sorry. I did not realize you were on a roll, but please go ahead.
I was building a narrative.
So sorry.
So how do we want our chicken to be safe, our air to be clean, our people who sell us securities not to be crooked and destroy our economy every 30 years, which they do every 30 years? How do we do all of that? Well, we could say as a country, and in 1791, this was maybe a possibility, we could have said, well, all 50 states, or at that time 13 states, will be responsible for all of this stuff. And the only thing the federal government will do are things that require total uniformity among the 13 states. So declaring war. We knew that Georgia could not declare war, or New York couldn't declare war, because if they disagreed, that would be a real problem. So we gave that power to Congress. Receiving ambassadors and recognizing foreign countries. We couldn't have 13 different decisions about that. So they gave that power to the president, right? And so on and so forth. But things that can be managed locally, should be managed locally. Thomas Jefferson felt very strongly about that. And he's right, Pete. The best local government applies locally. But in an interconnected economic world like 2025, that model cannot work. Georgia's laws about the internet cannot be different than California's. Georgia's laws about even product safety can't be different than California's because international corporations have to send their products to 50 different states. Right. So we have a federal government to make whatever laws are necessary for uniformity, which in an economically interconnected world is virtually all laws that apply to the economic economy. So that's one. So what do we do with it? We know Georgia can't do it. We know Colorado can't do it. So how does the federal government do it? Well, the founding fathers would have answered that question as follows. It's mostly up to Congress to decide on big policy goals, and then they defer the actual specific decision-making to the executive branch. Pete, I need to read you something. I'm sorry.
Congress passes the Clear Air Act. It goes to the EPA.
But before we get to all that, I want to go back to 1984, okay?
Oh.
Now, this is a time when the Supreme Court is full of Republicans, is very conservative, not by today's standards, but very conservative. And they had an issue before them. The IRS had decided, the Internal Revenue Service, the Treasury Department, had more or less decided that private schools that discriminate on the basis of race should not get a tax exemption under the tax code. And that was an interpretation by the executive branch of what the tax code means because the tax code was ambiguous, okay? That case goes to court with Bob Jones University, and here is the court explaining the authority of judges to second-guess these kind of broad policy decisions. Because, Pete, that's a really broad decision. Should we give tax-exempt status to private schools that discriminate on the basis of race is a very broad decision not answered by the statute in question. And I want people to listen to what the court said 8-1 about that question. Ever since, this is quoting the Supreme Court, ever since the inception of the tax code, Congress has seen fit to vest in those administering the tax laws, the executive branch, very broad authority to interpret those laws. In an area as complex as the tax system, or put in environmental system, security system, whatever, the agency Congress vests with administrative responsibility must be able to exercise its authority to meet changing conditions and new problems. As early as 1918, Congress expressly authorized the IRS to do that kind of thing. And then the last sentence of this whole paragraph is this. Congress, the source of IRS authority, can modify IRS decisions if it considers them improper, and courts exercise some review over IRS actions. But in the first instance, the responsibility for implementing and construing the code falls to the IRS, the executive branch. And that should be true for environmental law, securities law, everything. And one judge who dissented did not judge from that point. There were 9 justices in 1984 who understood what you and I have now been talking about for months. In a system as complex as ours, as big as ours, as diverse as ours, a legislature full of 100 senators and 600 members of Congress cannot regulate the things we need to regulate in this country for safety. What they can do is get out of the way so billionaires can control the world. And that's what's happening right now.
Okay. And how much of what you just explained has been changed by the Chevron decision?
Not so much by Chevron, but over the last 25 years, a tremendous amount has been changed. And the amount of deference unelected, life-tenured judges, especially lower court judges, give to federal agencies has gone way down, limiting what federal agencies can do, limiting how Congress can delegate to federal agencies. And I don't want to brag about this again, but in 2016, I wrote in November 2016 for Dorf on Law that although abortion is going to be what the media talks about in the next 5 years as the major issue for the Roberts Supreme Court, for the Trump Supreme Court, deregulation is going to be a bigger issue and a bigger change, and it's what they want, is deregulation. One last thing. Once the court gets through limiting greatly how federal agencies can respond to regulatory problems, which is the goal of the billionaires, then the court is going to turn to Congress and is going to limit Congress's power itself to deal with those kinds of problems, because we have a libertarian Supreme Court doing libertarian things that believes regulation is wrong. And Pete, we are right back to 1932, before Franklin Roosevelt threatened the court with his court packing plan so he could change this very behavior. It wasn't about abortion or affirmative action or guns or free speech. Roosevelt threatened the court over this, over stopping economic regulation.
It's interesting that you refer to it as a libertarian Supreme Court. And I'm sure I've heard that before, but I feel like I haven't so much. Is that common to refer to this court makeup as libertarian? Because the way you're describing the issue that we're talking about today, and so many of the others, well, all of it certainly, is how much power does the federal government have over your life, your business, all of it. And libertarian point of view would be leave me alone. And I want no rules. I want no laws. I want very little. I want very little government in my life. I want the fire department to be run privately and only respond to those people who are paying their fire dues, and all kinds of scenarios that Ayn Rand spun and some 14-year-old read, and it changed his entire life. But now he's got a powerful podcast. But they're not real. They're well dangerous. We can talk about the criticism of libertarianism. But how common is that? And is that your term?
Let me explain, and then this gets into the second half of the controversy or the story. The first half is, what do we do as a country? Like, how do we make our chicken safe? That's the first part. The second part is who decides. And you just raised the question of who decides. So who makes the final decision? So let me
Who makes the final decision on this? The question is how to keep our chicken safe.
And our environment
Well, let's
clean
stick with chicken. It'll be fun to just stay with chicken. And you and I don't know how chicken is kept safe, so we're just going to make up scenarios.
So Congress, let's say there is a salmonella outbreak of some horrible proportion that makes the chicken industry a subject of Congress's vision. Is Congress going to isolate what caused the salmonella and create a cure for that? Of course not. Congress is going to authorize the experts in the Food and Drug Administration to figure out what happened and come up with rules to hopefully prevent what happened again. Because Congress can't debate this, right? There's no way. It's just not a thing Congress can do.
I do say about salmonella, my good friend from.
So, hey, let's take a time machine. We're going in a time machine now.
Here we go.
And we're going. And we land in 1991.
Oh.
And we land at a Federalist Society meeting.
Oh, there I am. I have a full head of hair and I'm wearing parachute pants. Go ahead. We're at the Federalist Society.
And Randy Barnett, who some members of your audience will recognize, Randy Barnett is the leading constitutional libertarian in America since 1990 or so. And Randy's view is neither the federal government nor the states should regulate too much, because he's a core, sincere libertarian. He believes that the incentives in the private marketplace will do the job. Okay. But the Federalist Society from 1982 until 1992 had taken a very strong position on this. Whatever the right answer is, it's not judges interfering. In other words, the Federalist Society position circa 1992 was, if there's a disconnect between how Congress is instructing the executive branch to solve problems with our constitutional system, that disconnect should be ironed out by Congress, not by the courts. The reason I say that is prior to Roosevelt in 1937 threatening the courts on public radio, prior to that, the court issued two decisions that got in the way of congressional delegations of power to the president. And the court struck down both of those things. Never since. There's not since the Roberts Court. For 40 years, that went unanswered. Here's my point about that. The Federalist Society was divided on that question. Most Federalist Society uppity uppus in 1990 said the court was wrong back then, that the court should reverse Roe, end affirmative action, but get out of the business of judging economic laws and get out of the business of overturning agency decisions, because that's an overreach for judges. Unless the decision is really terrible and obviously wrong, judges should stand down. Randy tried to convince the Federalist Society to go a different direction, to say, no, we should go back to the pre-New Deal days where judges struck down economic laws all the time. And judges told Congress you could not give the agency this particular deference. And Randy was losing that battle in 1992, but he won it a few years later. And Barrett and Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, those three, are a product of Randy's work in terms of changing the mindset of important judges and academics about what judges should do. My answer to what judges should do with this problem is leave it alone, let the political branches fight it out. That was the Federalist Society's position until the 1990s. Pete, what changed from 1980 to 1992 was 12 years of Reagan-Bush judges. And once the Republican Party got 12 years of Reagan-Bush judges into power, now the Federalist Society leadership decided, along with Leonard Leo and others, that maybe the time has come where we can actually go back to our core beliefs, which is the federal government should do nothing and state government should do very little, and federal government the military. That's it. And that's how this change has come about. Con law doesn't change in a day. Con law changed because a social movement developed that was libertarian in nature, that Randy fueled along with some other important academics. And these are the people. So Randy's students over 30 years, and now multiply Randy by 15 other people, are the students who are judges and law clerks and have positions of power. And the last thing I'll say about this is when I reviewed Randy's book, that was both about libertarianism and the Supreme Court and judges, what I said about the book was, I have no idea who is right or wrong about libertarianism in general. I have opinions about it, but I'm not an expert. But I am an expert in what judges ought to do. And Randy should have written his book as this is what our country should look like, not this is how judges should remake our country. And that was my criticism of his book. And that's where I stand today. The American people should decide what should be the appropriate relationship between the Congress and the president, not life-tenured, unelected judges. Oh. And finally, as an originalist matter, the very first Congress gave the very first president enormous discretion over taxes and a bunch of other things that suggest that if one is an originalist and if one cares what happened in 1791, what I just expressed, that the people should decide, not the courts, is exactly what the founding fathers believed.
The founding fathers were not libertarians, it sounds like, in your view.
They were very much libertarians, but they wanted to come from the people or the legislature, not judges.
Ah, well, very important.
That's the difference.
Very important difference. It's just
Sorry,
to be
was
clear,
that boring? I hope that was not boring.
No, not at all. I just do want to be clear with sometimes we get a Segall point of view, which is more original, at times even radical over the years, many of which have now become normalized, unfortunately, because a lot of them are not great outcomes. But this view of the movement that started with Randy Barnett's and Leonard Lee, the Federalist Society that you now refer to as concluded as a kind of, with all those judges appointed, Bush, Reagan, you now refer to as a libertarian Supreme Court. Is that view of Segall's widely held, or are we getting a lot of Segall in that?
That's a fair question. The view that the founding fathers would have agreed with, I think, your and mine's perspective on how these issues should come out was ratified, confirmed by two experts in a 100-page law review article. I've mentioned it before, by two law professors at the University of Michigan, who did a deep dive on the history. And Julian Morgenstern and Nick Bagley concluded that at the founding and in the years after the founding, there was no idea that courts would step in to monitor the line between good delegations and bad delegations. So as an originalism matter, I'm on strong ground.
Would Bagley, I know Bagley would be, I've been in touch with him recently, would it be worth having him?
Yes.
Because I'm more interested, but I want to talk to the person, and it might be industry specific, it might not, might be a investigative journalist who talks about the chicken factory, who talks about Advil's way to market, who talks about the drugs that ended up killing people. Because all of this, the other problem is with all of media and politics, they water things down to make it seem like when there is, and just news media, that everybody's getting pushed on the subway, or that all pharmaceutical drugs are killing people, or there's so many stories that really matter and make the pharmaceutical industry or the financial industry, which is the easiest to criticize, I suppose, fossil fuel and so on. But who are the regulators? Who are the actual people doing the work to protect the American public and to do what's in the public's interest, which is why libertarianism is stupid. It's just stupid because you need government, real people and organizations, and yes, bureaucracies, to keep in mind the public's interest, including all the poor people and so that they don't get poisoned and not learn to read, etc. Like, you guys, there has to be government for to perform what's in the public's interest, and it would be nice if there were media resources that also had that theory. And there are publicly supported media, but now they're all going to be ravaged. Voice of America is not going to be run by Carrie Lake, so in every country that has a Voice of America, it's going to be some fucking MAGA voice.
Well, my dream solution, which is not happening right now, is I don't have answers to the questions, what does a country of this size and diversity do with national rules that apply in very different communities? I just don't have the answers to that. But what I do have the answer for, what I am confident in, is that whatever the answer is, the American people have been misled by Fox News and the far right, and by people like Randy Barnett, to believe things about administrative law that simply aren't true.
Administrative law?
So I'm going to explain. So in my profession, we divide things up in weird and arbitrary ways. For example, the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments to the Constitution, self-incrimination, double jeopardy, coerced confessions, unreasonable searches and seizures, all of the stuff involving criminal procedure, we call criminal procedure, not con law. And then we assign that to non-con law professors, even though it's as much con law as affirmative action or abortion. The right to not self-incrimination is a right in the Constitution. But the world of law professors and lawyers have divided this up so that people who do that kind of work don't do free speech work. Similarly, people who do administrative law, meaning there are so many non-constitutional questions that arise when, with our vast administrative structure, that they separate that from con law experts. But just this summer, on 2 different occasions, I was asked to come to administrative law lawyers to discuss my con law perspective on administrative law. And what was so interesting about that, these are people who don't do con law. They do administrative law, meaning how do federal agencies do what they do, what's legal, what's not, all that stuff. And one of the things that I got so impressed about and learned myself during these sessions was we have no idea how complicated this is. Like, Congress says we have a problem. The amount of nicotine in cigarettes is X, and it's killing people, whatever the problem is. That problem is not a local problem. It's a national problem because cigarette manufacturers sell nationally and internationally.
Yeah.
And what we should do about that is not going to be amicably or efficiently resolved by Congress. Now, if the Congress said to the president, we have a shitty country, fix it. What would I say? That's the law. We have a shitty country. You fix it, Mr. President. No, that would be unconstitutional because of the idea of separation of powers. The idea of separation of powers is Congress is the one to dictate broad policy goals, and then the executive branch administers that. If the executive branch administers those broad goals in ways that are palpably illegal, then judges come in. But the illegality has to be clear and obvious. That was our world between 1937 and 5 years ago. The world previous to 1937 was lower court judges and the Supreme Court striking down New Deal programs, which led Roosevelt to threaten the court. The court never did that again until the Roberts.
Such an important history that you enlighten us with and remind us, if we ever learned it before. Really very important to understand the way the country was and why things happened as a result of the way the country was and how long and how it's changed and when it's changed. Sorry, I just think I would underscore
right.
that.
I think people need to remember this one, if nothing else, this point. When the President of the United States, went to war with the Supreme Court and went on radio and said, we must save the country from the court. It was not over a moral issue. It wasn't over abortion, affirmative action, guns, whatever. It was about this issue. Federal judges not allowing Congress and state legislatures to do their jobs. That's what it was about. So state legislatures had passed a bunch of minimum wage laws, struck down, passed a bunch of overtime rules, struck down, a bunch of rules involving labor unions, struck down, worker safety, struck down, all of it struck down, to which Roosevelt replied, our country's in crisis and the court is causing it. And the court backed off. The court literally backed off. He won.
But the history on that is rich, but just how do you describe the suffering and pains there must have been as a result of all of those?
I could do that, and here's how. In 1918, the court was reviewing a child labor law, where Congress had said no more child labor. Children can't work in factories more than a certain number of hours and a certain number of days.
And we're talking
Because
children. Do you know the ages that were being?
Yeah, 7, 8, 10, 12, like young kids.
That young?
In coal mines, Pete. In
that
coal
young?
mines.
7-year-olds?
I don't know about certainly
I'm going to look
10,
at the
12,
youngest
14.
kid. I'm going to look up youngest coal mine worker.
That's fine. And this was a much needed law because a bunch of states had already done this, but a bunch of states hadn't. And Pete, listen, I can see your eyes diverting. Economically, if one state allows child labor, but another state does not, what's going to happen?
If once, then you would have a patchwork system.
Not only that,
all the industry would go to one state, and they would employ 8-year-olds.
Yeah, of course. The industries in the states which allow child labor would be more profitable than the industries in states that don't allow.
Hold on, let me read the sentence. The youngest coal mine workers in the United States were, quote, breaker boys, who were typically between the ages of 8 and 12. They worked in the early 1900s, removing impurities like slate and dirt from coal that was being transported on a conveyor belt. Damn.
You know what I love, Pete? When I say something and you confirm it like in 3 seconds. Excellent job by you.
Feels good for your ego?
It does.
Yeah.
So, and again, I hopefully it gives your readers slightly more faith in me than the audience, slightly more faith in me than they already have. Anyway.
Well, last podcast you referred to the Europe's Christian churches as BC, and a lot of people caught that. Oh, listen to the muck. Good God.
You can't make me laugh. It's bad. You'll get muck if you make me laugh.
Bad for the muck. Ooh, if the muck comes out, I won't. Again, finish. Sorry.
So Congress wanted to do something about this, right? So what Congress did is it said if they didn't even regulate child labor directly because they didn't think that was going to pass. What they did is they said, if you are a company that is going to send your goods across state lines for profit, meaning in interstate commerce, then you cannot use children to work more than a certain number of hours in a certain number of days. That would have ended child labor effectively in this country, the kind of child labor we're talking about, the really awful child labor. The court struck it down for no reason other than libertarian grounds. That caused decades of children dying in factories and coal mines. And it's all when people ask me why I hate the Supreme Court so much, and they normally go to like Dred Scott case, blacks can't be citizens, or Bush versus Gore. Sure, we have, or the immunity decision, Trump's case, there were Shelby County. We can talk forever. But honestly, that child labor decision caused death. Like it caused disease and suffering among children. And the court did it based on no law, just judicial interference with what they thought was the right way to run a country. That's happening again. It's happening again in this court in this time. And by the way, last point, hamstringing the EPA at a time when climate change is such an obvious and direct threat to all of us is unbelievably dangerous and might be the most dangerous thing we're facing in America today.
Yeah, maybe. But, on the flip side, what generation of parents do you think will be able to put their 8-year-olds to work in kind of manual labor in tough positions? Because I would argue that this generation has gotten really soft.
You know what? What generation is it? The millennials. They could use some of this, but different conversation.
They could use some what?
They could use some of this, right? Some of this coal mining experience in their early teens. Pete, in all seriousness, listen, we have so many difficult public policy questions in this country about the relationship between government regulation, a strong economy, and safety, right? That's what it's all about. Everybody wants America to be safe. Everybody wants America to be profitable. But sometimes those two values are in conflict.
Right.
In fact, they're always in conflict. Who decides which wins should be up to Congress, delegating power to experts. And if Congress doesn't like that result, they can change it. The person I don't want resolving that conflict is either Justice Thomas or Justice Sotomayor. They have no experience in it. They have no knowledge about it, and they shouldn't be involved in it.
There you go.
At all. And that's where I stand on this issue. And sadly, we've moved in exactly the opposite direction.
You've been Segalled.
Thank you, my
A lot of sound effects today. Okay, I'm
So
going
I
to wrap it
got
there. I want to get this out and share it with people. I love the conversation we had today. I learned a lot, as I always do. You are so good at presenting. I'm sorry for throwing you off your roll at this point, but at one point. But you did great. Even the muck. We heard very little muck.
Thank you for that.
And I hope you feel better. And I really
Thank you for that,
appreciate
too.
that you brought an
I
actual.
get on the couch and watch a lot of sports, which,
Yeah.
by the way,
Yeah.
my parting comment is this.
We don't do sports.
In the law,
I'm going to edit this out.
The government is not allowed to censor speech. And I believe, although you are not the government, in the context of our relationship, you are the government, you have censored my sports speech for 14 years. One of these days, we are going to get someone on this show, and we're going to have a vibrant discussion about sports and politics that your audience will love and will appeal to everybody.
I'm not opposed to ever having a conversation about sports and politics. I'm just not interested in talking about the Hawks defense, zone defense. Like, I don't, or what happened at this past weekend's game, or anything. But if somebody wanted to talk about class and
the
race,
role of race in sports, for example,
what?
Race and sports?
Yeah, no, I'm always interested in race and sports and class and race and gender.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm very glad to hear that. We're going to talk about that in future shows. I'm moving, Pete. Listen, now I'm being serious. I can't spend the next 4 years talking about constitutional law. I just can't. It's going to be so difficult and so hard. I can do it in my classroom. I can do it for my school.
We're going to find plenty of other things to talk about here on Sundays and Segall. With Segall, you're going to see it evolve. You're going to see it evolve,
Good.
Folks. Yeah.
That's what
we want to do a show together. We want to bring in maybe a third voice, maybe more nudity.
We need a woman, not for nudity, but for a new voice.
Yeah, but you and I will do it probably shirtless at some point just to spice it up.
The most confident thing I can say on your show that I've ever said in 14 years is there is no one who wants to see me shirtless.
Okay. Well, that's not the case. I've already gotten some requests at PODJAM. Can Segall swim with me?
Yes. Excuse me. Damn it.
Oh, muck. We got muck. Oh, and we also got a jingle just submitted, hot off the beautiful voice of Vicky, who recorded it. Are you ready to hear this together with me, Eric?
Pete, I can't wait.
All right, here it is. This is right from Vicky, the new Sundays with Segall. And anybody that wants to record a jingle is always encouraged to. But here it is. Let's listen to it together for the first time. Ready?
It's the legal eagle, Eric Segall, Sundays with Segall.
That's awesome. That's the best thing ever.
Oh my God!
Can you just send me that? Can you send me that clip separately, please?
Yes, I'll send you the file exclusively, and we're just going to keep adding to it and dressing it up. Vicky, thank you so
really
much.
funny.
That's great. All right, I'll let you go now. All right, there he goes. Sundays with Segall, a new jingle, and we can add to that. And anybody who wants to, definitely let me know. You know how to get a hold of me. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Okay. Hope to see both Pete Co and Vicky. Maybe they could do a duet. There's going to be a lot of duets at PODJAM, I think, in Vegas. So get your tickets now. Write a rating and review. We did shows on Saturday and Sunday. At least I posted interviews with Christian Finnegan and Segall tomorrow. Dr. Christina Greer. I felt bad about not getting the show up on Friday. Not that bad. I know you guys don't like it when I beat myself up for something like that. But I love doing it. I love having these conversations. Can't do them without your support. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic right now. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. If you're listening on Sunday or anytime, this conversation was super relevant and will unfortunately stand the test of time, the issues that we talked about. But I am out, my bumblebees. Go Bills. John Carroll taking us out as always.